My name is Lisa Elvin Stiltori, and I'm a genealogist and a passionate traveler, and this is How Roots Will Travel. My objective when I started this channel was to talk about genealogy, and somehow it got wound up into Les Filles du Roi and Les Filles Mariées, which I'm ever so grateful for. In 2021, I started with Les Filles du Roi. By 2023, it became apparent to me I needed to address the Filles Mariées who had come before and were constantly there. And there's less of them, but they are truly, truly I call them the founding grandmothers. The filles du roi are, to me, the founding mothers. But les filles mariées, the marriageable girls, came between 1634 and 1662. Absolutely the founding grandmothers. So we are going to take each one of them. I'm on episode, I think it's 141 now. And so, yeah, there's quite a number of them. If you want to see past episodes, go and have a look on my index on my havrootswilltravel.com, or you can look at the playlist as well to find if I've done yours. If not, please let me know. I love getting suggestions. So without without any further ado, let's carry on. Remember to subscribe, like, and notify. If you want to be a member, that's great. You got some perks there as well. And my PayPal button is on Have Roots Will Travel. Any and all is wonderful. And I thank you for your support. Let's get on with the show and let's find out our Filles Mariées of this episode. Today we're going to be looking at Les Filles Mariées, episode 141, Jeanne Jaleau, dite Ploumelle. And this comes to me from a viewer request, so I was very happy to accommodate. So let's get to know Jeanne a little bit better. Jeanne was born in 1625 in Fontenay-le-Comte in France. Her parents were Moisy Jaleau and Marie Lapointe. She was born in the region of France known as Pays de la Loire, and inside of that region, the département Vendée. Now, this area dates to the Gauls, and during its history was captured and recaptured by the French and English alike. The picture of this castle that you see here tells the story of this amazing area. It's called the Château de la Terre Neuve, which means the Castle of the New Land, and dates to the late 15th century. It's open to the public. The Church of Notre Dame that you see on the left dates to the 13th century, but was completely rebuilt in the 15th. Fontenay-le-Comte is a historic town, which was once the capital of Poitou. It sits on the Vendée River and was an important administrative and cultural center as early as the Middle Ages. The town really thrived during the Renaissance, and many elegant buildings from that time still stand. And it was home to notable figures like mathematician François Villette and writers like François Rabelais. Fontenay-le-Comte saw repeated conflict, captured during the Wars of Religion, partly dismantled in 1621, and later held by both royalist and revolutionary forces during the Vendée Uprising of 1793. So that was after the French Revolution. Today, you really can walk the streets and really see the history of not only this area, but of France in essence, because it really tells the tale. Jeanne has a very interesting kind of pedigree, because when she came to New France, she was actually a servant of Pierre Le Gadard, Sieur de Repentigny, in which you see the picture there. And he was the director of what was known Directeur des Embarcations for New France, so the director of recruitment in essence. And so he kind of recruited Jeanne to become, a domestic employee of his. She didn't stay too long, though. A groom that would take her away from all that. His name was Marin Ferrier, and he was born in 1619 in a town, a commune called the Grand Mesnel in France. His parents are unknown. The Grand Mesnel is found in the Normandy region of France, and it is part of the Calvados département, if you will. It is now part of l'Ibéro Pays d'Auge. So it's actually not called Grand Mesnel anymore. The reason why it was called Grand Mesnel was actually there was a very noble family called, and the very noble man Hugh de Grandmesnil, a knight from this very region, fought alongside William the Conqueror at the Battle of Hastings in 1066 and was rewarded with lands not only in England but also here as well. At the center of village life stood the parish church, likely first built in the in the medieval period and dedicated to a common Norman patron like Saint Pierre or Saint Martin. And so this is kind of the church that you see here. You see that Marin would have been baptized in. And many of these parish registers start in 1600. And now they rest in the archives of Calvados and our gold mine, truly. For if you're researching this area, it will actually be extraordinary in terms of the resources you may find. So Marin and Jeanne were married at Quebec City on September 3rd, 1647, absolutely among the early birds in terms of Quebec history. So they would settle at Trois-Rivières, which is only the second settlement of New France. The Trois-Rivières means three rivers. And one of the reasons it was called that is that it has three channels that form at the mouth of the St. Lawrence, and therefore Trois-Rivières. And it was known as Three Rivers in English Canada and English Quebec for a very long time until the French kind of reasserted themselves. And now, out of respect, and truly it's the right name, is Trois-Rivières. And it played a very strategic role in that early period. Remember that it was founded on July 4th, ironically, 1634. And this is only, before that, the English had taken over the New France, and all of the French had left, and they only came back in 1634 and quickly asserted that, hey, we've got to have more than Quebec City. And here was Trois-Rivières. Some of you may be surprised at how strategic Trois-Rivières would become and was, but it was also very strategic during 100 years later during the American Revolution. Some of you may be surprised that some of your ancestors may have fought alongside les Américains and will qualify you for membership in the Daughters of the American Revolution or Sons. So you never know what you're going to come up with in terms of who fought on what side. And there was a lot of anti-British sentiment at that time, and so some of them chose to fight alongside the Americans. So let's have a look at the family they would create. Well, first of all, they would have Pierre, who would become a priest as of 1676, and he was the priest at Beauport, at Ile d'Orléans, Saint-Laurent, Saint-Jean, Cap Saint-Ignace, and Longueuil. So he's very prominent. Their next son would pass away at 4 years of age. And finally, their next son would pass away at 13 years of age. So there are no descendants from this marriage. In a very tragic occurrence, he was killed by the Iroquois on August 19, 1652, along with Jean Véron, who was the husband of Fille Marie Marguerite Ayé, who we profiled in Fille Marie 91. Marin was captured and burned at the stake, and the details of this particular tragedy are so horrific. Those of you who are descendants of that can look for more information on that, but it really was a very unpleasant and that's putting it mildly, horrific way actually of dying. So this is the tragedy that she would encounter. The groom that would sweep her away for the second time, her second husband, was Maurice Poulain. He was born in 1622 in a commune called Villebadin, France, now called Gouffin-en-Auge. His parents were Pierre Poulain and Anne Ploumelle. Now, this Villebadin is found in the Normandy region of France, and once again, we return to the Orne département, or county. Some of the pictures that I have here, one of them is, it's known for, it's a notable landmark. It's called the Château de Bourg-Saint-Léonard. It was built in the 1700s, but obviously this was not during Maurice's time, and it's a wonderful place to kind of feel what this little town would have been. Now, the church that I featured here, Saint Jean Baptiste, was actually rebuilt in 1822, and it sits on top of another church that had been built. So many churches were lost or destroyed, obviously, during that extraordinary time of the French Revolution. So this is where our beautiful Maurice would come from. Let's have explore his journey. We know that Maurice was in the colony as early as 1649. He became a very important man. He was appointed procureur fiscal, which is like a financial controller of à Trois-Rivières, and then a procureur du roi, the king's accountant, almost is what you would say, or a purchaser. Procureur is someone who purchases things, and he served as a judge, and he obviously was extremely, extremely talented. And so we have to say that Jeanne truly married very well the second time around. They were married September 8th, 1654 at Trois-Rivières. On to have 4 children. Michel would marry Marie Jutras and have 5 children, 4 of whom made it to adulthood, and 2 that left descendants. Marie's mother was fille mariée Elisabeth Redisson, who we profiled in episode 93, and I put the link for you as well. Jean-Baptiste would marry Louise Cresse and would have 5 children, 4 of whom would survive. We have Catherine, who would marry Joseph Godefroy and have 7 children, all of whom made it to adulthood. And then we have Marguerite, who would marry François Lemaitre and have 5 children, all of whom survived. Françoise's mother was Judith Rigaud, who he profiled way back in episode 9 of Les Filles Mariées. Just amazing. Now, in the 1666 census, we have Maurice Poulet, he procureur du roi, he's listed. We have Jeanne, and then we have Pierre de Repentigny, Michel Poulet, Jean-Baptiste Poulet, Catherine Poulet, Marguerite Poulet, they've been busy, and Michel Simon. So that Pierre de Repentigny, that is her first son that would pass away eventually. And then we have in the 1667 census Maurice Poulet, Jeanne, veuve de Marie Francheville, and then we have Pierre Francheville, that's that person, and then we have Michel Poulet, Jean-Baptiste, Catherine, Marguerite, and we have a domestic, Champagne, 30 years old, 8 beasts, and imagine this, 45 arpents valeurs. It's about 40 acres of land. One of the tremendous and amazing landowners of the time. Tragedy for Jeanne. He would pass away, Michel would pass away sometime between 1670 and 1674. He was between the ages of 48 and 52. He and Jeanne would have been married less than 20 years. We find them on the 1681 census. We have Jeanne and her children, Michel, Jean, Marguerite, and we have a domestic, Jeanne Fauché, Louis Fauché. So these are very young domestics. And 3 guns, 7 bêtes à cornes, that's 7 goats or horned animals, and 40 arpents valeurs. So a little bit less this time, but certainly still an extraordinary land holding. Where the story takes a lovely, lovely detour. Jeanne would eventually receive the seigneurie of Saint-Maurice, making her the seigneuress. She had indeed come a very long way. What's so special about this seigneurie is that, of course, it was named after her husband, Maurice. Eventually, the river that flowed through it was also named Saint-Maurice. Eventually, the region would also be named after the river and be called the region of Mauricie. So those of you who are from that region or have ancestors, we can trace it back to Maurice Poulet. So he was extremely important, and so was Jeanne. Jeanne would pass away at the age of 83 in 1708, and she left us with 130. Just phenomenal. Now, wasn't that an episode? Jeanne is probably up there in terms of like my favorite characters because it's like watching an episode of very, very early Downton Abbey, but like in the 16th century. Just amazing what she went through. And remember that her first son turned out to be a very, impressive priest, and was, had a marked effect on New France. Then she marries a very, very strong man, um, Maurice Poulet, who ends up being a really strong person in terms of, although he did not live a long life, his memory and his land, and he was named. The river was named for that, and then finally Mauricie. So her impact of her life was substantial. So I always love at the end of the story when the women finally get the land. So there she got the land and she became a seigneuress to some degree, and an owner of a land, if you will. So I appreciated that story and was just so moved by all that she did. So thank you, Jeanne, for having the strength and the perseverance, the talent in many respects to be a true companion to your husbands and to never giving up. You are a definitely an inspiration, and we thank you and we bless your memory. Thank you to all my patrons, supporters, and subscribers for being the wind beneath my wings. I appreciate one and all. And with that being said, I'll see you on the next episode of Les Filles Mariées. Until then, au revoir.